One of the things that I want to say something about was our family life. Um, Ruth was an extraordinary mother and wife and person. She was a person who was gifted with a very bright mind. As I think I mentioned, she was a better scholar than I was by far. Certainly a more serious student of everything. Ruth read voluminously, and there was nothing that did not attract her deep mind and spirit. And she brought that into our home. So all of our children studied musical instruments. We all sang as a family a great deal. And we spent a lot of time in libraries and museums, concert halls. We loved doing things that centered on the arts. Ruth and then Bobby later sometimes would lead architectural tours of Los Angeles, and we'd take friends and just look at all of the buildings. Ruth was perhaps one of the half a dozen most gifted choral musicians in the Mormon Church, and probably the deepest scholar of music and worship, certainly that I know of in the modern Mormon Church, although most people wouldn't know that because she was also very modest. I mentioned that when we left the University of Wisconsin, Ruth had a prestigious scholarship, the E.B. Fred Scholarship, and was working on a PhD in musicology. But then we had our third child and then our fourth child, and so her education was interrupted. But when the children were back in school, Ruth decided to go to the University of Southern California and study choral music and do a doctorate in music, in musical arts. And so she was doing that and taking courses at USC and pursuing her degree. And again, she brought so much of that into our home. So the richness of her learning, as well as her choral conducting. She was the choral conductor of our local congregation, and did, in some ways, maybe had what I would guess is the most ambitious choral program of any ward in the church. And I say that having lived and seen many choral programs, but we did over the course of time, both in the Westwood Second Ward, and then when I was bishop and Ruth was director of music for the Los Angeles First Ward, which I'll talk about in a minute. We did parts of the St. Matthew Passion and the St. John's Passion and the B minor Mass and Messiah and the Berlioz Requiem and Verdi's Requiem. We would do just these amazingly elevated and ambitious programs with orchestra, sometimes with D trumpets, and with a wonderful organ. By the way, the organ in the Westwood Ward is one of the finest organs in the church. It's a pipe organ that was developed by Schoenstein and Company in Oakland. And Ruth and her friend Claire Hardy were able to persuade the church that since this chapel was on the temple grounds, that it should have an extraordinary organ. And so there is this great organ which we had as part of our sacrament service. Ruth played the organ. She also conducted the music. And so we had this tremendously rich, praiseful, spiritually celebratory sacrament meetings, and also special programs on the stake level that Ruth put together, and then she and I put together when I was stake music director when I was on the High Council. So it was just, all of that richness was very much a part of our family life, and is in the part of our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives now. But it was certainly something that made our home a place where many people came, because we put on little dramas and little concerts, and just had a wonderfully rich environment in our home.